welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to crack open the history books to uncover the secret origin of an idea that really shapes every single courtroom drama, every legal decision, and every criminal trial in the world. And you know what? It's an idea you use all the time, maybe without even realizing it.
I mean, we all get it, right? Intuitively. The difference between a tragic accident and a terrible crime is intent. It just feels like common sense. But have you ever stopped to wonder where that legal distinction actually came from? Who was the first person to decide that what's happening inside someone's head matters just as much as what they do with their hands?
Think about it like this. Someone's throwing a baseball. It gets away from them, and it smashes your window. Okay, that's an accident. They'll probably have to pay for the repairs. But what if someone picks up a rock and deliberately smashes that same window? Well, that's vandalism. That's a crime. The outcome is identical, a broken window, but the law treats them worlds apart, and it all comes down to that one invisible thing: intent.
Now, you might be thinking the answer lies with some famous Roman legislator or maybe a Greek philosopher, but honestly, you'd be wrong. The origins of this idea have nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with the really unique, kind of chaotic world of the early Middle Ages and a group of monks who were deeply worried about the state of the human soul.
Okay, so let's dive into this. Our story starts in the early medieval British Isles. You've got to picture a place that's geographically cut off from the rest of continental Europe. I mean, travel is hard, communication is slow, and all of this isolation creates a completely different kind of culture.
So this isolation, it led to two very different versions of the church. Over on the continent, you had this structured, hierarchical system run by bishops in their dioceses. It was very organized. But on the islands of Britain and Ireland, the real center of power and influence wasn't the diocese at all. It was the monastery, the abbey, run by an abbot. And that, well, that changes everything.
The result was that law wasn't handed down from on high in these big formal codes. Instead, it just grew, organically, from local customs and practices. So while the continent was busy building on all these old Roman legal traditions, the Irish and British were basically running a legal laboratory, developing a completely unique approach to justice.
And it's right inside this isolated laboratory that a revolutionary new legal technology was born. And it wasn't a weapon or a fancy new tool. No, it was a book. Specifically, a type of book we now call a penitential.
See, up to this point, secular justice was all about the outcome. It was brutally simple. You poke out an eye, you lose an eye. You kill someone, you pay their family a fee, a higher fee for a clan chief, a lower one for a slave. The system only cared about the final act. Your intentions? They didn't matter one bit. But these Irish monks, they weren't just concerned with keeping societal order. They were worried about something much bigger: eternal salvation. And for that, the act itself just wasn't enough. They needed to know what was going on inside the person, what was in their mind, what was in their soul.
And this gave birth to a totally radical new concept: intentionality. This is the idea that an action's true weight, its moral, and eventually its legal significance, depends on the invisible world inside the actor's head. This was the great innovation of the penitential books. They created a system to measure and judge the invisible.
And this shift is just fascinating. Secular law was simple, right? The act equals the punishment. But penitential law introduced this much more complex formula: the act plus your status in society plus your intent equals your penance. So the same sin committed by a bishop was punished way more harshly than if it was committed by a regular person, because the bishop had greater awareness and a greater responsibility.
And believe me, this wasn't just about religion. This was the very beginning of what we'd now call criminal science. Concepts like motive, responsibility, culpability. I mean, the absolute bedrock of our legal system today, they all have their roots in these medieval guides to sin, like the Penitential of St. Columbanus from around the year 615. This idea was going to shape European thought for centuries.
So let's hop over to the continent and see how this all builds. Because this very private, spiritual idea, born on a lonely island, was about to collide with the full force of imperial power.
We are now in the age of Charlemagne. This guy was building a massive, unified Christian empire, and to do it, he forged this powerful, symbiotic alliance between the church and the state. They were, for all intents and purposes, partners in building a new world order.
And this cooperation is just brilliantly illustrated by a single legal collection, the Dionysio-Adriana.
The Pope himself commissioned this updated law book and sent it as a personal gift to Charlemagne. It even had a dedication to the king. But here's the most amazing part. It listed the king's own secular laws, his Capitularia, as valid sources of church law. Talk about a perfect symbol of cooperation.
But this golden age of cooperation, this, perfect harmony between church and state, it was incredibly fragile. In fact, you could say it was entirely dependent on the singular vision and power of one man.
When Charlemagne died in 814, his empire pretty quickly fell apart. The great protector of the church was gone, and in his place, you had this chaotic landscape of feuding nobles and petty kings. The church was suddenly vulnerable and found itself in constant, unending conflict.
So in this new, much more hostile world, the church needed a way to defend itself. It needed weapons, and the weapons it chose were laws. Jurists started digging up ancient legal texts, or what looked like ancient texts, that powerfully asserted the church's authority and supremacy over any king or noble.
There was just one tiny little problem with these powerful ancient texts that proved the church's supreme authority. A lot of them were complete forgeries.
But this wasn't just simple lying. This was a sophisticated and, frankly, desperate legal strategy. In a moment of absolute crisis, these jurists didn't just find the law they needed, they created it. They would invent new canons, change the wording of old ones, or attribute a bishop's ruling to a much more authoritative pope, all to build a legal wall around the church and protect it from the political chaos.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. We've gone from a contemplative monk on an isolated island to an ambitious emperor on the continent, and finally to a clever forger just trying to survive a political collapse. And what a journey it's been. It all started with the monk's quiet question about the soul. That question led to a system for measuring intent. That system then influenced an entire continent unified by an emperor. It survived the collapse of that empire by being weaponized, and eventually, over centuries, it evolved into a core principle of every modern legal system on the entire planet.
And this is what we should take away from all this. Our most fundamental ideas about justice, the ones that feel like timeless, absolute truths, they're nothing of the sort. They're historical artifacts. The idea of criminal intent wasn't handed down from on high. It was forged in the messy, desperate, all too human struggles for power, for order, and for salvation.
And that's our explainer for today. It really makes you wonder, if our legal system was shaped by the needs and crises of 1,000 years ago, what ideas and pressures in our world, right now, are forging the common sense of the future? Something to think about.
Knowledge transcends time. Truth endures.